There has to be accountability and cost control in terms of in college tuition and the whole college experience. It has gotten out of hand.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we can't go and necessarily go and vehemently and dissuade people from taking, because our society needs them. When you look at critically, we have nursing shortages. We have shortages in so many critical areas. Well, what do you think about the detriment? They can't afford the education. But we as society need them. We need grade school teachers. We need nurses. We need dental assistants. We need truck drivers. We need pilots. All in all. And the common theme here is the cost of education.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast of Ascending Thoughts with Mr. William Rogers. We are going to go over the issues of the day through the tumultuous times that we're all setting forth here. And my name is Brian. I'm accompanied by Mr. Rogers here, the renowned business advisor. And I just wanted to talk about what's going on in the world in terms of the wrapping up of the summer season and with college coming around and what's going on with the class of 2026 and everybody that's going to go into that.
Yeah, good afternoon, Brian. Good afternoon, neighbors. It's a beautiful day to sit and chat and talk about some of the relevant issues of the day. And last week and this week starts the official send-off, schools back in session, and what the world has in store for this incoming class of 2026. It's interesting when given in terms of the time and timeliness is we've had a tremendous amount of changes. We heard legislatively that there's been a lot of talk and chatter, but the Biden administration unilaterally via an executive order to the Department of Education decided to cancel $20,000 in student loans. So I think that's tremendous in terms of basically big news that's happened as of late.
Yeah, and that's going for students that have already graduated and that have that outstanding debt that is sitting on their backs right now. For the incoming class of 2026, what do you see is going to be one of the biggest changes or one of the biggest factors when they graduate in the future?
One of the big constants that's happened in terms of an education and even going back in terms of times, because, what's interesting is I reckon back to during the time, this was 30 years ago of my college send-off, believe it or not. And we were always talking about how the environment that we're going into is changing so rapidly. 30 years ago, we would say maybe in a 10 to 20 year time span. So when we were looking at a new emerging industry, this was the backdrop when people were starting to use cellular phones and as well as other personal electronics. And now in today's day and age, those cycles have gone from 5 to 7 years to maybe 18 months to 3 years. So what it's telling you is one of the absolute rules is when we look at computing power, the acceleration of change just fundamentally, it's just happening at a much quicker pace. And so what I would in terms of say, and then I think that all stakeholders, and which we'll get into more of today, is we need to be adaptive. We have to, I would say, rethink, does it make sense to have a traditional four-year degree?
Or with that well-rounded education like it was determined back in the older days, the 1800s, early 1900s, where the purpose of college was for those upper middle class individuals to go to an institution and become a more well-rounded individual in business, politics, social science.
There's a lot of social virtue to having what they call a liberal arts education, and the purpose and thinking behind it when it came about is we were transitioning from an agrarian society, and then also too in the early 1900s, and our largest group of new college entrants were recent veterans of World War II, was the idea to create a person who's thoughtful and well-rounded and informed and who can be engaged in what we would call our civic public discourse. In today's day and age, when we're looking at it, we might need to look at more of what I would say as a choice versus a rigidity. And when I say in terms of a rigidity, we have in terms of a traditional track and curriculum that we try to set all upon. And the notion and the idea is benevolent. Education is powerful. It's one of the most transformative aspects. But the challenge is when we're in a 21st century is we need relevant education. We need when I say relevant, you need education that you can go and utilize and convert.
And be a specialist.
Not a specialist necessarily. What I say is that education that you're learning, like for example, you have a passion of flying. So you're going to learn education about flights, aerodynamics, more so than you're going to learn about literature and history, because it's directly applicable to get you in terms of the ability to go out and earn money. That's why. There are always going to be those who want to pursue those fields. And believe me, society needs those. That's what makes our culture what it is. You want to have great museums.
Oh, yeah.
You have to have people who are working in that, but we can't necessarily fit everyone down the same pathway. So in trying to better align education, when I use in terms of direct relevance is how we can go in that education you're going to get. You can try to earn a living and getting a return on it quicker. Yeah. Because we can't go necessarily on the investment risk, because everyone, when you went from the poorest of communities to middle class communities, and it's been this belief for 40 years is that the education that you get, no matter what is, it's a faith, a belief that it will pay off. Now we're getting more and more where it's questionable. We have the cost of education has just been exorbitant. The income earning ability of many of these occupations that those go into, there isn't a payoff. And so therefore it's a time that we all have to question it. Government, parents, students, business leaders, everyone has to say, time out here. We need to course correct.
Yeah. Yeah, it is questionable. You said is the return on investment worth it? For the viewers at home, you guys know that the cost of education has just gone through the roof in the last 20 years. And are you going to start out making six figures? Or are you going to start out making $30,000 a year when colleges can exceed $200,000?
Well, there are many degree programs that are extremely valuable in terms of education, as I've met people in terms of in my line who have master's degree as social workers, those who are going in terms of being grade school teachers. You go up and down the line of many fields, even in terms of some areas where they're assisting in medical and all kinds. And they might be in terms of the income earning ability between 50 and 80,000 a year. It's not what we'd say an income. Those are middle class wages, by the way, but they're not enough when you add on and put the burden of $150,000 worth of debt. And I think that the real elephant in the room that we really have to demand is there has to be accountability and cost control in terms of in college tuition and the whole college experience. It has gotten out of hand.
Yeah.
Because we can't go and necessarily go and vehemently and dissuade people from taking, because our society needs them. When you look at critically, we have nursing shortages. We have shortages in so many critical areas. What do you think about the detriment? They can't afford the education, but we as society need them. We need grade school teachers. We need nurses. We need dental assistants. We need truck drivers. We need pilots. All in all. And the common theme here is the cost of education to go and get that, even though these are not occupations that pay in excess of $200,000 a year.
Yeah, those specific specialties, doctors, surgeons, things like that.
Well, take a look in medicine, for example. You have it very much distorted for those when they're coming out of medical school, because the vast majority have at least $250,000 or more of debt. They're going to gear towards what we call elective cosmetic surgery versus OBGYN, family practice, pediatrics, and what society needs. Yeah. And this is a fundamental conundrum. And we have to look in terms of society and looking at, just like we invest in roads, just like we invest in utilities, education has to be viewed in terms as in one component in that in a modern age.
And from the business standpoint, it blows my mind that you have 22, 23-year-old young men and women out there that the second they get that 4-year degree, they have the piece of paper in hand, and now automatically their net worth is negative $150,000.
And in addition to that, it's not that they're also starting out at a significant salary. They may be starting out at $17, $18 an hour just to get started out because they don't have in terms of any directly related experience. But yes, they have a valuable degree. So I think that we have to have a wholesale retooling.
Yeah.
That, for example, why do we send an 18-year-old and believe that they just go to school for 4 years and not work? That they wait 5 years, and many, and after they've graduated, they go and pursue a master's degree for another 2 years. So what, 6 years or more before they get into the workforce? We need to have a public-private partnership where you go a year, then you go work, you come back to school, and you go work again, and you keep coming back. And the principle is, and we have to get off the notion, and one of the problems where we fail in education is that we teach you, you get a degree, and then the degree slowly fades away because as time goes on. Education has to be lifelong. There's always continuous learning. But no one's going to be able to afford on a continuous basis. We have to create in terms of a loop where we can get some education, get some work experience, some money, so you can kind of mold what was typically like the trade school route,
just
similar in that model, or apprenticeships, so that people are getting acclimated in an applied manner of a working profession.
Yeah, they're just evolving in those professions to grow from
They're
the
also
book
getting
work
their feet
and then
wet. Yeah, they're also getting their feet wet and exposed. So that now you can take that and then go back and continue and gain the learning. But we need to stretch learning out. Just have to do them in different buckets as opposed to saying, I want to get you everything you need for 4 years. And how many of us know that's all they did 20 and 30 years ago? And the world's changed 5 times since then. So we have to now have a continuous learning. We can't go for 4 or 5 years straight. We need to have a certain amount of courses certificate on, get it in terms of some tangible objective, like in a working program, and get working credits. So if you're working at an employer, you're getting credits towards a degree. We have to build those viable pathways.
Yeah, and that sort of stems from the point I wanted to talk about was the curriculums. The curriculums of school, as you mentioned, that time period of the working for a year, going to school for a year, and then integrating with a company or a field that you wanted to go into. What can the curriculums look like to really have that in play? Because we all see that everybody has the general education courses, and then they go right into their major, their upper division courses. Could we stem from the general ed courses and then going to working with a company and then going back to your major courses?
This is where we have to have a real debate. Because a lot of times when we talk about in the aspect of higher education, the United States has inarguably the best, highest education in the world. Nobody can afford it.
Yeah.
And because of that status, many universities get very complacent and arrogant because we are attracting a lot of overseas students who are trying to go to preeminent universities. With that said, we have to look at how it's great to have this luxury, but how are we going to do the most public good? And so, like, for example, you and I drive up and down the freeways, we're seeing more and more billboards, Arizona State Online, USC Online, Berkeley or Wharton School of Business Online. What I think that is totally abhorrent is that many of those programs online versus in person are the same price. We don't have any price differentiation, foremost. Now, obviously, they're looking at themselves as a brand.
Correct.
So why would I want to create a cheaper alternative? Okay. So you have so many of these aspects of monopolistic pricing that we don't have free market forces as well as proper government regulation, that it's just allowing it to get it out of control. In addition, we also have, in terms of in a belief in society, that is we want to send people to higher education because of our law and the ability to borrow, student with no credit, and also being guaranteed by their parents you're able to borrow unlimited sums. And that doesn't create, in terms of any sort of accountability to the institutions, that we have to control our costs, because there's always
There's
a
always
pocket.
that income coming in.
The student, regardless of their financial ability, can always borrow unlimited sums. And I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it creates a modern day form of slavery. Yes, think about it. When you put someone out into $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt, it is a form of bondage. And we have to call the moral outrage for what it is. And what I was appalled, and when you read in some of these financial innovations that are coming out, this was before the loan forgiveness I was recalling, and just in terms of reading, a couple of universities are also starting to experiment with income sharing programs. And I was just floored.
Yeah.
It's, for example, we're paying for an education. You're over $150,000, and now you're going to take a piece of my future earnings because you just want to keep justifying how expensive it is. I think it's wrong. It should be predatory. It's illegal. I think that income sharing agreements should only be permissible for those who are going to be professional athletes, an entertainer, a celebrity, in those specific lines, but not someone who's there in good faith, trying to get an education and go and work is what we call is part of, the regular average Joes out there. It's just wrong.
And then for the viewers at home, explain more what you're talking about for the income sharing, because I know that there's a lot of people, this might be a little bit new to them.
So just so our viewers understand, the United States is a very innovative country. And one of the innovations that we have is in terms of financial products. So as people go shopping at the store, you're seeing a lot of malls that's called buy now, pay later. It's all about utilization of credit. We see it all on TV. Buy this new Jeep Cherokee. No payments for 90 days. We find all these different ways to get things on credit. And the headline is a lot of students are going to know is that if I have $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt, and you're starting to see once you graduate $2,000 or more of monthly payments, people are going to freak out.
Yeah. And
colleges need a certain amount of new incoming students. So in perpetuating the existence, they have to get innovative. We don't have the $2,000 a month in payments. We're just going to take a piece of your future earnings. That's an innovation. But that is very akin to what we would say, outrage or accusations against payday lenders and all the other predatory financial institutions that we have tried to vilify. And those who get affected the most are those from the poorest of communities. And that's something that just cannot stand. We have to, as a society, collectively get together, is that it's a vital necessity and national necessity that we have to do something about the cost of college education. And there has to be accountability. And I think that it's a relevant conversation. Parents, students, their role, everyone's is what we would say a party to this, that we participated in perpetuating this system that's totally unsustainable. Should college institutions be in the business of the experience? Because when you look in, and as I've talked with a lot of trustees and a lot of administrators and just try to understand and unpack it, why is it freaking expensive?
Oh, it's like a resort.
Because we're converting them more into resorts, and that they've become in the business of a permanent vacation more so than an institution of higher learning. I think in the modern era is that we need to have commuter campuses. As I told you earlier, I had initially dropped out. I was getting frustrated like a lot of people, and I went and got work, and then I went back. And when I went back to go and get my 4-year degree, I found a program at the University of Redlands that was designed for working adults in an office building. It wasn't on a regular campus. I think that we need to look more and go in and get the education. You're adults. If you want to party and socialize, it's on your own. Yeah. It's on your own. The club lives and all the other stuff. I know a lot of institutions are going to push back because there's a lot of tradition, there's a lot of history, there's value in terms of developing networks. But we have to make choices as a society. There's certain things that we'd like to have, but they're luxuries that we can't afford. What is the biggest, most imperative that we can deliver the most good, we got to deliver the education, got to deliver it in the most affordable way possible.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to transfer. That's what's going to uplift the most amount of people out of poverty into what we call higher income earning occupations. And also too, in many of the professions that as we're transitioning from what we call strictly blue collar, brute force labor that requires some sort of knowledge of automation that you're seeing because of the rapid amount of computerization that happens when you're looking at auto mechanics, welders, and construction, so many different industries. The college and access of education has to be our first and foremost goal.
Yeah. And going off from that experience, I just think about my days when I was going to school. When you're paying so much money per credit, is it really worth it when you're sitting in that 300-person lecture hall? Are you getting the best bang for your buck?
And unfortunately it becomes so much of a monopoly. And as you said, Brian, we have to go and take in terms of geology, we have to go and take in terms of that literature class or history. I think it should be totally permissible that we need to have some sort of interoperability. A lot of institutions do allow in terms of transfer credits of going to community colleges, but they cap the number of units. I also do think that if academic institutions truly believe in the value that students get in general of having those courses, I think they should be discounted. I think they should be free. If they truly believe in it, they should put their money where their mouth is, and that you should pay full freight for what you're going
for
there
your major.
For the major.
Yeah,
That's just in terms of my belief, that saying that we strongly believe in terms of society as a culture, people's ability to write and think, they should be heavily subsidized and free.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people need to look at it and really establish the value of those core classes first to start out with versus going to community college. I remember when I was younger and community college was $45 a credit versus $1,000 a credit for an out-of-state school for the same course.
Correct.
And there is a difference in price, but also there's the college experience that is different at that four-year university. But is it really worth it once you get to that certain level of increased cost?
It's not at all.
No?
It's just there are certain aspects of tradition and what we call rite of passage. Unfortunately, we follow as lemmings and don't question. And what we're trying to, in terms of as we educate people how to ascend and prevail to greater heights, you have to be contrarian. You have to develop a contrarian mindset. And we also have to be adaptive and strategic, and especially in today's day and age. And it's a very hyper-competitive environment.
Yeah.
Change is inevitable and change is rapid. This is why we have so much division in this country, because we have large amounts of groups that are the amount of anxiety and ease because of feeling displaced because of this rapid change. My only antidote to that is we as people, to be successful, have to lean into change. We can't turn our head away. We can't duck our head in the sand. Education is just one tool in the toolbox, and education has to be relevant education, not just education for education's sake.
Yeah, we need to really evaluate and look at all the figures and all the tools at our disposal to figure out, is it worth it?
Not just only is it's worth it, that we're creating good pathways that are attainable. Because what happens is, especially with a lot of people and their different background, you need to get to income earning sooner. You can't have a 4-year delay.
True.
So in other words, we can have a year, but then you can get me, instead of starting out $15 an hour, get a little bit of education, I can get it 19. That's a payoff. And then go in and learn more and get up to maybe 25. We have to have these tie-ins because when we're looking at it from those, and especially many different kids are also providers in their homes. It's not just the parents. Everyone has to chip in a multi-generational format. It locks so many people out.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, many of them go and do the 4 years, and they're also working a job on top of that. Think about that.
Yeah.
They're working a job on top of it. Why can't we integrate the two? Why does it have to be an either or proposition? Education has to be work. Work has to be education.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You get the education, then you go to work. Why not do them at the same time?
Right. And I understand there are going to be so many different points of view and philosophy where some people are going to do social work. Some people are going to go work in a hospital. Some are going to go in terms of maybe serve in other areas that are
Mhm.
totally unrelated to their field of study. But there is nothing wrong with getting tangible work experience. That's
Yeah,
all I'm just
yeah.
trying to say.
Yeah, and it's just the interaction between
But it's
people and companies
education.
for the experience.
It's
yeah.
not just people. It's seeing the environment and the world that it is and what you're trying to do and why I'm so passionate about education and why I got 2 master's degrees is because the idea that I can learn these wonderful things and go apply them today, 4 years from now, not 4 years from now. When you get a thirst of knowledge, you want to start learning and applying those skills.
Yeah.
If you're learning to fly, you're going to have an itch to get in a cockpit, right? If you're learning to weld, you want to learn to weld. It's just like those who want to get into medicine. It takes 10 years to be a doctor, but you can at least do medical related tasks to get exposed as you're working to the longer goal. And that's what we have to, what's been dislodged is to break them down in those segments and get people some income earning at it. And also to turn the spigot off. I'm enrolled, but I'm not paying tuition. So if I'm a year in school, I'm paying tuition. I'm a year working, I'm earning income, but not paying, but still enrolled. It's a partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really raises the question of, for me, what I'm thinking about is how do we start that integration with colleges and universities and also get the word out there to businesses that this could be a possibility?
I think it has to be a multilateral partnership of business leaders. We need to have government regulation. We need to have government intervene. Parents also need to start saying no. And also students also need to also be pushing back as well. Everybody needs to have in terms of in a voice in this and demanding that we need to have in terms of some relevant change. And employers have the biggest sway here. They really do in terms of that because they signal to everyone else what they're looking for. If they state what they're looking for, the market has to adapt. In many respects, when I've looked at business programs at school and a lot of other professional programs, they are trying to be adaptive to the current, business environment. So I would say is that the business community has to get out there and say, look, we're going to put some skin in the game and have a pathway for apprentices. We're going to put some skin in the game as we need to start repurposing degrees. 4 years? Let's create certificates instead. Instead of what's a bachelor's degree, right? What's in terms of the value of it? So we need to create a series of certificates that we get you 12 months of these courses and you've earned something.
Computer science, for example.
There's computer science. And then if they want to add in a few in terms of what we call general ed classes, it could be fine. But the point I'm just trying to make is I think that it's just insanity is waiting 4 to 5 years before you can get to income earning years.
Yeah.
We can't look at them as either or propositions. We have to look at them as part of the same and working them together and actually makes you better. I was a better student, Brian, when I was working in business. I was more focused. I was more enthusiastic and passionate because I was directly able to see what I was learning and what I was doing versus when I had started out, it's all theoretical. I didn't have anything tangible yet.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I remember working over summers for a small business and working with the owner and seeing how do you do business? You learn about it in the classroom. You learn about the marketing, you learn about the finances, everything like that.
Marketing, for example, you're learning various marketing strategies in school that now in terms of small business can now start to adapt how they look at their branding, how they look at in terms of their product price strategy and placement. Now you're able to engage and be a partner.
Yeah.
It's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
Whereas the data point that we're all looking at and to be successful is learning the continuous feedback loop. What's going on in the environment, how we take and process that in and react appropriately. And waiting 4 and 5 years is just not what I would say wise strategically. Unfortunately, it's the only game in town. Therefore, we have to change it. We have to reform it.
What sort of timeline do you think that we can expect for if we were to move about this, if there was legislation that was proposed or if there's parent groups or anything like that.
I think it may take 10 years or more just because we're talking about legacy institutions. And let's take, for example, the Ivy League and all the other tiers of prestigious universities. They have so much invested in their brand and their reputation and tradition. So you're going to have a lot of built-in resistance out there. I think that realistically, as we as a society may have to make decisions, and as voters and as government, is we may have to split the blanket here and say, we're only going to fund public institutions and private just have to be solely private. Well, what does that mean? We're not going to fund it with Stafford loans. We're not going to back it up with what we call public dollars. They truly believe so much in their product, they need to put their money where their mouth is and let students obtain private sources. And I think we can have the more influence and have the two separate tracks of public institutions of being adaptive to what we need in the marketplace. Because as you've seen, community colleges have always been extremely innovative and adaptive in terms of our 4-year, have not necessarily, and as in California, unlike in other states, is we have 2 types of 4-year public schools because the UCs are more research-based institutions and they are preeminent institutions in world class, but they can all work in this public-private partnership, I think, interchangeably, and we can use public dollars accordingly, and as well as maybe we just get rid of loans and just have free college education. And then basically loans are what we call the private marketplace for going to private institutions. And a more logical pathway.
Yeah, and then you said the free college, and you say free college, and there's so many people out there that are like, oh, free college, this and that.
Socialism,
you know,
whatever,
and I'm just
typical criticisms.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think. I'm just looking at the funding aspect of it because
let's
it will
take from the funding. Let's look at, because as you, Brian, I'm a business guy, and when I'm proposing in terms of certain things, and in terms of in economics, I'm looking at an asset, something that when you take someone's who's without education, they only have a certain amount of income earning ability in their lifetime. When you give them a little bit of education, the income earning ability goes up. You give them each subsequent increment. But it's totally undeniable. The bigger issue, what we have to look at as a society and dispel the belief that it's socialism and it's not good, proper, prudent investment of what we want to use our public budgets for, is that you have to have a viable workforce who pays taxes, pays into Social Security, and be self-sustaining. And to be self-sustaining, you have to have higher earning wages that are livable wages so that you don't rely more so on public benefits. So it is a whole 360 aspect of why I take that belief. For someone who believes as much as a diehard capitalist, I believe it's a good investment. I would rather say I want to give everyone free college education versus putting someone where they've got to make the choice, debt or no debt, meaning I have no education, but at least I know with education, there's a payoff that I benefit from in terms of of making someone who can basically have higher income earning ability. We as a society do not argue about the value of airports, roads, bridges as infrastructure. Human infrastructure in the 21st century is absolutely critical. And because everything is knowledge-based, we depend so much on the information age of the internet, we have to make that connection of a knowledge-based. And we have to look at it as that we as a society believed in K through 12, meaning that it's free. Because in other societies, they stop at 6th grade or 8th grade, but we universally believe, I think it needs to necessarily be readapted as, no, we need to have free higher education, but we're only going to do the public schools, but we have to reform the public institutions to being what we'd call a more adaptive approach versus a traditional 4-year approach.
Yeah, to have those students that are graduating with the knowledge and with that work experience so that they
quicker attainable results, like a certificate. 12 months, come out certificate, on and get some work, but then you're coming back.
Yeah.
But then you're coming back. In other words, it's a stepping stone. You're coming back, then you're going and working, and you're coming back. And it's a stepping stone. And in that partnership, as I firmly, in terms of believe, benefits all of society.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I mean, I definitely see where those points hold true, but I'm also thinking, what could be some of the negatives that could come out of that you can possibly think of? I'm just trying to think full circle
there's
here.
a streak in American culture of rugged individualism. You're supposed to pull yourself up from your bootstraps and do everything on your own, and people who take pride upon it. There are people who take pride upon how they've gone to San Diego State or any university, like in terms of Montana U, and then they worked 40 hours at a bar and they feel proud about it. We're not dispelling in terms of dissuading it. I'm just talking from an economics perspective. How do you get the most bang for your buck? Because we as taxpayers spend billions of dollars in terms of an education, and we don't get the best return on investment that we could. And I'm just telling people, as a business advisor, and in terms of from economic analysis, by creating in terms of a model, first and foremost, a free college versus subsidizing student loans is more practical. Number one, I'd say a policy choice. Number two, if we can reform the education curriculum to be a little bit more adaptive in that, okay, we are going to go in terms of in an apprenticeship model, but maybe degrees are stretched out and we're pulling people down a pathway, but we're filling it in with working experience, we can get a better return on investment. Ultimately, the goal here for all of society is to have highly productive people. And the more important data point, what people are missing is we have to get our labor force participation rates up. We have an aging society, greater amount are getting old, which is definitely going to tax our Social Security, our healthcare system, and we need to get more young people engaged into working. And just think about all those, because they're going and getting education, you're spending all that money. Yeah, a lot of them would like to go in terms of work, but that distraction may affect my grades, whatever that it is. We have to look in terms of, we got to now make it as a requirement. You have a requirement that you're taking course, a working requirement. They need to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And then so that you got a semester on, then you got a semester of work, and back and forth.
Yeah, and then one question that comes into my mind is, when you do graduate from college, everybody says, oh, it's so hard to find a job, this and that, this and that. With that model, it seems that those sectors are pretty much laid out for you.
That's the point, is that you're laying the foundation, getting the experience and the direct professional experience to basically mold yourself in terms of professionally. And you're also, as a young adult, trying to filter out and get varied experiences, figure out what you want to do with your life, necessarily in terms of in the lecture hall of a philosophy class. You're working at, whether you're at the hospital, you're working in terms of whether it's a government agency, you're working in terms of a corporation, whatever that it is, you're getting different types of exposure.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The exposure, and then when you're talking 18 to 22-year-old young men and women in the country, that their brains are still sponges and they need that exposure to figure out.
Exposure. Right now, the best, what I would say, jobs program, hands down, for 18-year-olds has always been the U.S. military, because they've always given them the most amount of directly related, tangible work skills. But we can't militarize everything.
Yeah.
And we can't have all these kids going into the military. In addition, many individuals are going to be against in terms of serving. And obviously we call it for what it is, the potential risk of hostilities. We get that. My point and my takeaway is that it's always been the most effective program for molding and creating skills for 18 to 20-year-olds. But it doesn't have to be a sole monopoly of the military. The issue, the point being is, it's incredible when you give young adults directly related, applicable experience. In education and in higher education, we call it applied learning. Because there's one thing you learn the theory in terms of through academic textbooks and you work on a project, but the other aspect is the doing of it.
Yeah.
To synthesize and elevate one's learning and expansive knowledge and expertise, you have to have a component of applied learning. It's just, it's kind of absurd to think that a lot of that doesn't happen until people get in a postgraduate versus in an undergraduate. You could do this in a high school and a middle school. When you do lab experiences and field trips, the thing is we have to take out, it's too siloed. We need to make them more integrative.
Yeah, and going off on the topic of the militarization of it, I can think of so many things where you take an 18-year-old, whether it's auto mechanic to working on a jet engine to working with the combat engineers, bridges, anything like that. You're working with men and women that already have the degrees that are pretty much just being their shadowing guide through that process.
Correct.
And that's the direct knowledge.
And in addition, the benefit that young individual gets is that they're also going to get someone who's going to vouch for them because they're also building a resume.
Yeah.
And that you've got something that's beyond just Starbucks and Buffalo Wild Wings. And that is one of the crocs and tragedies that kind of happens in terms here is that we lock out so many in terms of people and they have to, they feel frustrated, they feel left out, they feel cheated that they did what they were supposed to do, did what they were told for 4 and 5 years, and now they're coming out knocking doors and no one's answering except the Gap and going to all these what we call low-level service sector job. We have to, again, like I said, the business community has a lot to say. Unfortunately, our culture in the last 40 years has gone more to what I call a free agent kind of point of view. And when I say free agent, it's analogous to professional sports. We're going to go hire talent and then talent's going to move in and out. So we don't have a vested interest in molding people.
Yeah.
And so we have to, as a culture, take a collective interest. And the reason that companies don't want to take that vested interest because they're training a competition. If I'm going to train you and then you're going to leave me, that's not conducive in terms of business. We have to look at it in terms of a holistic, in terms of way, is that we call it competition instead of competition, meaning we're all cooperative and that by creating more, there's more for everyone versus then fighting over this shark-infested water. It keeps getting depleted and depleted.
Yeah.
Because we have to critically look at sustainability in 2022 and beyond, and sustainability is a huge concern, not just environmental, but in terms of people's finances.
Yeah, and you said training the competition. I can just think, when an employee comes on with a company, they're pretty much on their own free will, at will employment for employer and employee. What would happen if, say, you did, say, a 2-year agreement or a 4-year agreement, like when you're in the military? What can you see for that, for the private world?
I think that the private world can adapt. I think the private world can have similar models, that there has to be some sort of quid pro quo, meaning that if we're giving you some sort of employment, that you've got some sort of service in return, like 2-year service guarantee. I think that there are all kinds of relevant ideas. I think that we just have to have some bold leadership from various stakeholders, from our political leadership, academic leaders, or institutions willing to go out there and buck the trend, and the business community who is going to put skin in the game.
Yeah, we've identified the problem, and then this is just one of the possible.
And the parents have to be the sounding board, sounding the bullhorn that enough is enough.
Yeah.
I'm not signing my name as a parent loan for my child to get $100,000 worth of education so that they can basically go out to the Sigma Chi party on the weekend or go out the nice park-like type of campus. We have to get realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just, I think that this topic is just so broad and so vast that we can't cover it in the time allotted. I'm looking right now and it seems like we're getting a little bit short on time, but we spoke so many things about the college experience, whether it was the cost of education to the programs and the degrees, certificates, things like that. What are just some of the highlights and the takeaways that you want the viewers at home to really think about until our next podcast?
In terms of an education, is we are coming near the time when we have elections coming up in November. And this is a time for reflection for a lot of the people out there to vocalize and demand what we need. And higher education reform, I think, is nationally critical. We need to totally reform how we fund education. We need to have some sort of price control, price survey, like a 9/11 commission, into really diagnosing this and what we can do. We also need to reform the whole notion that I think a 4-year degree is outdated. We need to modernize and reform. And I think the better, more adaptive approach is a series of directly related certificate programs. Universities are starting to do that. Many universities, as I'm a graduate at USC, has numerous certificates. You're seeing all kinds of institutions. They're just not affordable.
Yeah.
That's the bigger issue. The certificates are there. We're just not making them affordable. But we also need to have employers change in their job requirements. So when you're seeing in terms of experience and various things on resumes, they need to say, instead of the 4-year bachelor's degree, I want this certificate.
Yeah.
And we need to create all in terms of those pathways.
That sounds great. I just wanted to thank all the viewers at home watching this. I want to thank Mr. Rogers once again for coming on the show. This is not going to be the end of this topic. I think we can dive deep into this because this is the college send-off is such a broad topic for all of you going out there, class of 2026. But I just wanted to once again thank Mr. Rogers for coming out on the show, and we will see everyone next time.
Thank you, neighbors, for joining us. See you next time.